Well, hello, this is Kyle Plattner, and I'm joined by Nick Horob again, and we have another guest, Nathan Wentworth. Nathan's a progressive farmer in Central Illinois, and we're glad to have a discussion with him today. Nathan, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your farm?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I'm not sure I have much profound to say, but anyway, it's good to visit with you anyway, and hopefully we can learn something about what happened this year. But yeah, I'm a sixth generation corn and soybean farmer here in Central Illinois, right outside of Decatur. So think Farm Progress Show area. Been farming with my dad since 2005, and got a 15-year-old son, 13-year-old daughter, and my wife and I've been married 18 years, and um, just love doing what I do. I guess love farming, love doing raising my kids and doing what they do. So yeah, a lot of fun.
Can you
That's
share a
awesome.
little can you share a little bit of insight into kind of the decision making hierarchy in your farm? As things transition down, or are you and your father still managing the operation, or have things pivoted more to you, or just it's always interesting to hear how that transition planning is going as the years tick off the calendar.
Sure. Well, probably definitely when I first started farming, Dad was really the sole decision maker. Probably 95% plus actually. And when I started farming, is 100% of our ground is crop share ground. And so having relationships with the landowners was of utmost importance. And so that's one of my dad's very, very strong suits, is building and maintaining those relationships with landowners. And so, he having those relationships already established when I came in was very important. And of course, that was why he was the chief decision maker. And here over, the course of 15 years, of course, and really the last probably 5 years, I've kind of transitioned into the sole decision maker and logistics and products used on the farm, and that sort of thing, pouring through the data, and trying to figure out which is the best way to go on our farm. We did collaborate with a cousin of mine in 2010. We started farming together, and that really worked out well because he, I think, was in need of labor, and we were in need of equipment to farm the acres that we farmed. And so having that kind of a relationship really worked out. He retired in 2017, and I'm in the process of buying him out and sort of gained the ground that he farmed and that he owns. So we definitely have grown over the last 15 years. And but yeah, I think Dad's probably got another few years left, and that's great. He made a huge sacrifice to allow me to come farm, and really giving up a chunk of his income and allow a second family to sort of draw from that. And now he's toward the end of his career, and I'm just so happy to continue farming with him, and whatever it takes for him to at the end of his career is what we're doing. So
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. As we were beginning to see the end of this year, and as we end a super challenging year, I thought it'd be good and interesting to reflect back and think, what were the lessons that 2020 taught us, and how are we entering 2021 differently because of how 2020 unfolded?
Well, I know before we started recording, we were talking about how crazy 2020 has been, and obviously everyone knows that. And when you ask what have you learned about 2020, from a farming perspective, my mind immediately goes to agronomy. What have I learned agronomically? But honestly, as I kind of reflected on this over the last several days, there's some things we learned, through agronomy, in 2020. But I think the biggest lessons that I've learned are completely off farm, and more on a personal level. But at the same time, I personally, that definitely transitions into the farm and how we manage the farm and that sort of thing. Um, Certainly, we learned some things through a marketing perspective too. And Nick, I know you'll appreciate that, but it's and we can talk about that more. But at the beginning of 2020, really through probably the beginning of February, we had a lot of hope for a decent grain prices, and then all of a sudden, it's like the rug was pulled out of underneath us. If one overarching theme is something that we learned, is that a year like this can happen, and it's just you have to roll with the punches, and you have to rely on a plan that you have in place, and then again be flexible at the same time. But it's I guess from a marketing perspective, I was sitting coming out of 2019 crop really pretty optimistic. We had I probably had close to 80 to 100,000 bushels of corn yet to sell. It was on a DP contract, and like I said, coming into February, had hopes. My price target based on what my cost of production was around $3.75 a bushel on corn, and we were really close to that in that time frame locally here around Decatur. And given the situation, I thought, well, despite my price goal of $3.75, I wanted to maybe hold on for $4. And I think there was some reasoning. There were some things that would point to that direction. Well, all of a sudden, late February hit, and for I think several different reasons, not just from COVID, but the prices sort of just tanked. Oil prices at that time were negative, and so looking back on that, I mean, that was ended up selling that corn, I think, for $3.25. So I lost 50 cents a bushel, all because I didn't follow my plan. My price goal was $3.75. I kind of went away from that and ended up losing a fair chunk of money on that. And so if anything's taught me is stick to the plan. I've really tried to improve my marketing and really trying to take the emotion out of the equation by looking at your cost of production, setting price targets, and when those get there, you pull the trigger. Maybe you've got some sell offers in and that sort of thing. And Nick, I was looking at your Twitter page, and that top pinned tweet that you have about the tennis analogy. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that was perfect. And how as amateurs, and certainly in farming, because there's so many things out of our control, you might consider us as amateurs. Then you throw COVID in on top of that we're out of control of. And so as amateurs, we have to really try to limit the number of stupid mistakes that we make. And so I think that's a perfect analogy for that situation and my stupid marketing mistake. But it is what it is. Like I said, stick to the plan, but be flexible at the same time and learn from it. So, going into this year, we've obviously, who would have guessed the markets would have turned around the way they have? But we've got some good pricing, and obviously this is making up for my 50-cent mistake from last year. So
just to add a little color to what Nathan's saying here, if you on my Twitter, pinned at the top of my profile is a tweet that talks about the concept of a loser's game, and they bring the analogy to tennis. If you look at how amateurs play tennis versus pros play tennis, in amateur tennis, most of the points are lost. They're hit out of bounds. It's a fault on a serve. Versus pros, they typically win the points. They hit a better shot. It stays in bounds. And so the whole concept is, if you're an amateur, you should focus on making less mistakes. And in something like grain marketing, I think we're all amateurs. We can't predict the future. It's very, very hard, if not impossible. And so if you go into it thinking that I'm an amateur and let's limit the mistakes we make, and if we can cut back on the mistakes, that's how you win. And I do think farmers tend to get a bad rap because it's just such an important decision. If you look at a lot of people in their retirement accounts, just in their day-to-day finances, if you look at how people handle, back in 2009, 2010, when retirement or the stock market crashed, a lot of people bailed at the lows. And, you have a lot of people buying now after higher prices. And so farmers tend to get a bad rap, but I would argue that in most financial markets, we're all amateurs. It's really hard to outsmart the crowd. So that's a really good analogy, the concept of a loser's game. Just to pinpoint or to dig deep on one thing you mentioned earlier, you said that when you stepped into the farm, most of the farm was crop shares. In my part of the world, we are probably, in I office in Fargo, North Dakota, we probably have the lowest proportion or percentage of crop shares of anywhere that I've come across. It's pretty much all cash rent. Do you guys, and so I've learned a lot about crop shares and how they operate and the landlord farmer relationship. Do you guys still farm with mostly crop shares? And on top of that, do you have any tips for people on how to, like, what you see that can create a successful landlord-tenant relationship if you're doing a crop share?
Well, I think most of the ground probably in our immediate area has moved to cash rent. We're just very fortunate that we've, farmed for some of these families for close to 70 years, others 30 years. And, Central Illinois is probably, if you look at a cash rent map of the entire United States, Central Illinois with Sangamon County, Macon County, DeWitt, McLean, Hyatt County, some of the highest cash rents in all the country. And I think that makes sense because it's the highest productivity, most productive ground in the country. And so it becomes a challenge because there are certainly farm management agencies that push that in our immediate area. And so competition is pretty fierce in this area for those acres. We choose really not to compete with that. We can't compete with that. We can't compete with $450 per acre cash rent. It just doesn't work for us. And then to answer your other question, Nick, I touched on it earlier. The most important thing is relationships and communicating and building that trust and maintaining that trust. And so whatever you do, you can't do anything that's going to jeopardize that. You can't do anything that's going to cause them to think one thing that would cause distrust in you. And so I think the first thing is communication. Is we always try to communicate, whether that's a phone call, email, keeping them up to date. The big challenge is they choose to continue to pay their own bills. That's part of the crop share thing. And so especially this time of year, it gets a little bit tricky, and we're looking at chemical prepays, fertilizer prepays, seed prepays, and getting all those invoicing out at the end of the year so that they can either choose to pay this year or next year, and communicating all that with them. And it definitely is a challenge. If you look at cash rent, it definitely simplifies it. Absolutely does. But our preference is the crop share. It creates in them an attachment to the ground. They have a vested interest, and then they share in the risk also. So I think that's all really important. I think the biggest challenge that we're facing and will face is how do you transition that to the next generations? We've had, like I said, farming for some of these families for 70 years plus. And, we've seen that transition where one generation passes away and now their kids have it. So how do you create, or how do you help them create emotional attachment to the land, rather than just seeing a dollar sign and saying, hey, we can get $10,000, $12,000 an acre for this. So, I think that's going to be our biggest challenge, honestly, going forward as a farm. You think about, okay, yeah, weather is a challenge, marketing is a challenge. We've talked about that. Agronomy is a challenge, but really the personal side of it, the relational side of it could be the biggest challenge for us over the next, say, 5, 10, 15 years as these generations transition.
Do you do anything specifically that is meant to solidify that relationship, whether it's, on-farm meeting, newsletters, just anything that you found that resonates well with your landlords?
Yeah, we have one particular family who's been great. And this is a family that we farmed for over 70 years. And so they were based in Omaha, Nebraska. And then the 4 kids are actually spread out all across the East Coast, really. And so once mom and dad passed away, the 4 kids inherited it. And so one thing we've done since then is hosted a meeting on our farm where they can come and actually walk on their farm. We'll drive around and look, and we've got a new wind farm here, and I think they've got, well, they just have 1 turbine on their farm, but they took great interest in that. And so for them to actually walk up and underneath that wind turbine on their farm, that really means a lot. It really gives them a perspective that they would never otherwise receive. And so, and that's followed with, we go out to eat with them, take them to dinner, have a business meeting. We talk about a lot of things, but a lot of it is really education because they have no farm experience whatsoever. And so it's, from the very basic things, what is marketing? We do market their grain for them. And so they have a lot of questions on how many bushels and where are you selling it and what is a basis? And, so it's a lot of it's just basic education, things that you and I may take for granted, but it's certainly important for them.
Yep. That's great. That's great.
And those are the sorts of things that they would never teach you. If people went and got an agronomy degree, they'll never talk about, maintaining relationships with the people that you work with. And yet that is such a huge component, as you just highlighted.
That's right. Yeah. Incredibly important.
So curious, did 2020 make any difference in those? Did they strain those relationships? Did you feel like it improved them or didn't make much of a difference?
I don't think there was any strain put on the tenant landowner relationship at all. In fact, it was kind of business as usual for us in that area. And really, we talk about that or kind of joke around, I guess, as farmers, it was kind of life goes on as usual. We planted the crop, we took care of the crop, we harvested the crop. Certainly the marketing aspect was a roller coaster ride, but I think it's a nice segue here because I think the relational piece is, talk about things that we've learned in 2020. The relational piece is probably one of the most important things I've learned is, we've been forced to isolate this year and quarantine and be alone. And whether that's a restaurant's been shut down or the government's telling us you need to stay home or whatever it is, and so that's become kind of entrained in our mind. We need to stay home, we can't go out, we can't talk to people, and at first, as farmers, we kind of isolate anyway. We're kind of independent, we're stuck in a tractor or a combine for 12 hours a day or whatever it is, we're by ourselves. And so I think, at first I thought, well, this is going to be easy, not a big deal. We do this anyway. But it's kind of amazing, really, just here getting toward the last several months of the year, just how much that does. I realized how much it does affect me. It's not being able to go out to eat with friends after church, or it's not being able to go on a date night with my wife, or whatever it is. It's all these little pieces are affecting relationships. And I think underlying, at least for myself, is I crave those friendships, crave those relationships. And I kind of found myself sort of here toward the end of the year, just kind of down and lots of reasons to get down. But certainly I think that relationship thing is incredibly important. And so I think, we talk about going into 2021, is how can somehow the situation that we're in, how can we maintain those closest relationships? It's not just the landowner tenant relationship, it's the most important ones. It's the one with my wife, it's the one with my kids. I can't go to their basketball game, they don't have them. It's how do I maintain a relationship with my coworkers, with my dad and my cousin, who I mean sort of less because of this. And so I think in 2021, we have to be creative in how we do that. Certainly, we have to be mindful of what people's wishes are, I guess, and what they feel safe doing. But my hope is I think everyone's hope is that there's some return to whatever this new normal is going to be. You know, if we can go out to eat, we can go see a movie, we can do whatever, and not feel so, I guess, isolated or so just constrained in what we can do.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's important. Important relationships are important, and it's kind of what keeps our inner drive going in a lot of ways, I think. Can you touch? You mentioned your dad and your cousin. Do you guys have any other labor on the farm? Any other full-time help?
We don't. Well, I said we don't at first, but we do hire some seasonal help at harvest time. We've got a guy who actually works for the railroad and has a couple days off a week. He actually takes 2 weeks of vacation in the fall because he wants to come out and run a tillage tractor for us. So that works out really well. But that's something that we've been very fortunate that we've not had to hire a lot of labor. It's I kind of joke all the time. My dad and my cousin are both 75 years old, or not 70, they're 72. Boy, they heard me say that, they'd be upset. Anyway, but you know, yes, they're at the end of their careers, but you cannot replace labor like theirs. They're the ones that are going to be there first thing in the morning. They know exactly what they're supposed to do. They know what their role is. They're safe. They've done it for 40 years, 50 years, whatever. And you just can't replace that kind of labor. And that, you know, I talked about relationships earlier in the landowner-tenant relationship, but I think a close second behind that going forward is how am I going to replace their quality of labor? I know in your visit with Christian last week, he touched on that. And finding, I think both of you guys said, is in polling of farmers, the hardest thing to find is good quality labor. It's the number one issue on everyone's mind. It's how do you find a truck driver that's not going to get in an accident, who's going to show up on time, who's not on drugs, you know, and that sort of thing. How do you replace this aging labor force that is so experienced and so willing, I guess, to give of their time? So,
well, what's top of your mind for what you're going to do on your farm when your dad and cousin, you know, decide to maybe cut back a little bit or a lot?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's still things I'm trying to kind of pour through. My son is 15, my daughter's 13, and, you know, and how do they transition to the farm if they want to? If they don't, that's fine. I want them to do what they're called to do. And if that's not farming, that's fine. I'll support them in whatever. You know, so there's that in the back of my mind. The other thing is, and we've already sort of transitioned to this, really the cheapest labor is hiring your local retailer to do your spraying for you. You know, at $5.50 an acre, which includes the sprayer and the logistics behind it all and the labor and the maintenance and all of that. It's, you know, you could pencil it out for sure, and probably come out a little bit ahead. But for me right now, and probably for me in the near future, that's going to be the cheapest labor and the most quality labor that I can get, the most bang for my buck, I guess.
I always talk about how a sprayer can be a very high ROI piece of equipment for the farm, but I maybe naively go into it with the assumption that there's excess labor there to operate the sprayer.
And certain, I think that's, you're exactly right. If you do have that labor, you definitely want to keep them busy. And the sprayer, I think, is the logical way to fill that time. But there again, are they a quality enough employee to do that? You know, so I maybe am too cautious. Maybe, I don't know. I think that's something I have to evaluate going forward as the farm grows. You know, certainly if we're farming, you know, or if we're covering 20,000 acres a year in different spraying passes, that sort of thing. You know, if you've got 4 or 5 spray passes in a year on corn and beans and fungicide, then, you know, that the ROI on that does pencil out, and especially if you've got the labor there anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
So Nick, maybe we'll transition to you. Do you want to share a little bit about what's 2020 taught you, and what are you taking into 21?
Sure. So, for all the ups and downs of 2020, I definitely echo Nathan's sentiment on relationships. Some of my best friends I haven't even seen this year, and part of that is I spend a lot of time with my elderly father, and my wife and I had twin boys in January, and so that's definitely been tough, and looking forward to kind of getting over the hump and getting back to more reality there on a trying to think glass half full. I've been able to spend every night at home with our twin boys as they're growing up. And if this was a normal year, there definitely would have been 10, 15, 20, trips. And so I'm trying to take the glass half full approach of, this would have never happened, being able to spend every night at home. And just from a business standpoint, just trying to be reflective on where are my strengths, where are my weaknesses, and doubling down on strengths, and getting to the point where weaknesses aren't the weak link in the chain that's going to break. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And so actually, right now I'm going to be doing some reflecting. John Deere, who we're now partnered with, has a shutdown between Christmas and New Year's. We're going to be working at Harvest Profit because we have a small team and we got to keep supporting our customers, but it's going to be an opportunity for me to do some reflecting on planning and really being thoughtful about what's the top thing, what's the thing I can do every single day to move the needle. And so I'm going to really make a strong effort going forward on identifying, here's the big picture goals. Here's the thing that I need to do today. And here's the thing I need to not do today, and try to be thoughtful and really intentional about doubling down on my strengths, and if I have weaknesses, have other people do them that are stronger. So intentionality is a big thing that I'm gonna push going forward, and just getting better, becoming a better overall person in the business, and at the same time, hopefully, getting back to a little bit more reality at some point, or a little bit more of how things were in the past as far as relationships. Here maybe later in 2021. So I'm definitely looking forward to getting that personal and professional network face to face, because I think it's been interesting for me. A quick side note: when I talk on the phone, I walk, like I pace around my office, I pace around the building, and so doing these kind of meetings has been, I squirm a little bit, and I look forward to the little things in life, being able to take a call on the phone, pace around a little bit, and so there were a lot of negatives, especially if people, if you had deaths in your family due to COVID in 2020. I mean, that's, a heart-wrenching thing. Luckily, in my close network of family, we haven't. But there's definitely been a lot of people negatively affected. And I'm trying to look back and say, here were the positives, and then focus on, here at the end of the year, trying to plan for what I can do to have as productive as possible 2021. So how about yourself, Kyle? Reflecting and planning, where are you at?
Yeah, like you guys have said, there's something about the nature of challenging, stressful times that sort of provides a sense of clarity. I think that, early on when I got the opportunity to observe some really good mechanical engineers, and what they would do is they would take any mechanical design and subject it to stress in order to identify where the weakest spots are. I think that's true. That's true in our own life, in our business and teams, that when we're subjected to stress, uninvited stress, it exposes where we need to focus. It exposes the things that probably need more attention. Makes me think about a book I read. I'm a book guy, so it has to connect to some book that I've read in the past. And a couple years ago, I read a book by Nassim Taleb called Anti-Fragile. And the whole premise of the book is that there are systems and things and people and teams that, when they're undergoing stress, they get stronger. And there are other systems and organizations and peoples and teams that, when they're under stress, they get weaker, right? So if you think about a tree that never goes through a storm is not going to have a root system that is as strong as a tree that undergoes a lot of stress and a lot of very challenging storms or whatever. And so that metaphorically is true of different things in our life that we relate to. There are certain systems and people and teams that when they undergo stress, it just makes them more resilient. And that's, if I think about, we with working with other people, with working with the people that my coworkers that I work with every day, all of a sudden that's become more challenging. And so in what ways have we become stronger, more anti-fragile because of these odd circumstances that we're in? Or we think about our girls go to a really small school with not a lot of resources, and my wife and I are very involved in it. I think about what did 2020 make us do as a small school in order to be better and go into 2021. I felt like there's a lot of aspects in which it exposed where we were weak, and a lot of ways in which it made us more anti-fragile, more resilient for what's coming. We had to build in extra capacity because of the uncertainty that was at play. And so I think about that with church. I think about that, like I said, with the teams that we work with. You think about businesses. There's certain businesses that are anti-fragile, that because of this stress, they'll come out of it with a greater amount of just ability to weather future storms in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have. So I love that idea. I think that, put things under stress. It brings a clarity about what matters, shows us where to focus. And I think, a lot of ways we can figure out what to do to use those as opportunities to strengthen instead of weaken relationships or organizations. So I did say that'd be my biggest takeaway. It took the ideas of that book and really made it real, put flesh on them in a way that back when I read a book, I didn't connect all those things.
That book, Anti-Fragile, is great. It's dense. I would say it's a hard read, like any of his books are hard reads, but it has a lot of parallels to farming where, in farming, if you think about volatility, if volatility increases, farming has the benefit of, being able to protect the downside with crop insurance, with marketing, with crop shares, technically, I think have a big play in that, and where you can still participate in the upside. So as volatility increases, you can protect the downside, but still participate in the upside of big crops, of better prices. And so that would be a recommended read. I would say it's a dense read, but it's a really good one. So just to end on a quick farming note, looking ahead to 2021, or maybe looking back the past couple of years, is there anything agronomically, Nathan, that you've done on your farm that you're excited about, or maybe something that didn't work out so well, just to kind of leave us with a little farming nugget here at the end? An agronomic practice that's a win or a loss, or something you're going to try next year? It sounds like that's your expertise.
Well, I don't know if it's expertise, but it's something I enjoy. But one of the things we're going to do in 2021 is reduce our soybean population by a fair amount, really. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we've always tried to do some sort of on-farm research, and this is one of those things we've done over the last 4 or 5 years, and it kind of goes back to really a precision planting. We're heavily invested in that technology on our planter, and this idea that there's all this talk on corn that corn must be perfectly spaced, and it should be. But there was never much talk on soybeans and perfectly placed soybeans at the perfect depth. And so, about 5 years ago, we wondered about this. If we can perfectly space soybeans and, get that uniform emergence, then can we, maximize the output on each one of those plants, thereby perhaps reducing population. So we've done all of these population studies. Typically, we'll plant between 130 to 140,000 seeds per acre. So we would use that sort of as our control, and then go all the way down and cut that in half, basically, with varying amounts in between. And for the 5 years, our data has shown that those reduced populations, actually all the way down to 70,000 population, has yielded within 1 bushel per acre of our 140,000 bushel or 140,000 population. So, that's a big cut. And so we were pretty hesitant because, there's always those years where something goes wrong and you don't get the stand that you desire. And so finally, after 4 or 5 years of this, we've made the decision. Okay, let's make the cut. We're not cutting to 70,000, but we've cut to about 110 to 112,000. I talked with another farmer over in the Springfield area, Brent Johnson, and he's done that. I think he's around 110 to 115,000, and just kind of swapping stories and experiences with him. And so obviously that's it's exciting for us. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit nerve wracking because this isn't just on a small research scale. This is on a farm wide scale now, and so we're hopeful, and I think we're very optimistic that this is going to be help our bean ROI quite a bit.
It'd be fun to touch base again, sometime, maybe next winter, and just get some insight into whether or not what your plan is going forward. Are you gonna keep pushing that down, or if maybe Mother Nature throws us some curveballs, and just to see how resilient that plan is. And so I'm envious of the objective experimental nature of what you have going on, and it's fun to hear those stories, and I hopefully look forward to hearing more about how that plays out, because I think that intentional focus on experimentation is a powerful and a fun thing about farming that can make the difference. So with that, I really appreciate you, Kyle, putting this together, and it's nice to meet you, Nathan, and look forward to doing more of these, and would love to connect again in the future.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you guys very much. And Nick, it was great to meet you. Hope you guys have Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And to all of your listeners and viewers out there, I wish the same for all of you.
Appreciate you both joining, and enjoyed the conversation. Wish you all Merry Christmas. Hope you all enjoy this season with those that you love. Stay safe, and thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.